Gargara, Saturday Down South, with us, and we missed him for a little while. He's in Florida. He's got kids, so that means that hurricanes and kids being bacteria magnets will slow down your life. So I do hope that this week has been normal for you, Connor.
It has been. Very thankful for that. You know, when you experience not only children getting sick and, you know, being out of daycare, and you experience a hurricane on top of that, you just root for routine. And I am someone that loves to operate within a routine, operate very well within a routine, not so much outside of it. So yeah, glad to be back on normal circumstances talking to you.
Absolutely. Well, look, last week we got the most crazy week of college football maybe we've seen, like as far as scheduling, close games, overtimes, all of that. I don't know how much of it has reshaped the playoff picture that much, because some of the games, you know, were teams who were probably on the outside looking in, but Ohio State and Oregon certainly did. Inside the SEC, I'm starting to have my doubts about Tennessee. I think everybody has their doubts about Alabama. What do you see as the SEC shakeup right now, now that Texas appears to be far and away the deepest team?
Yeah, Texas is in tier 1 in the SEC. I think that they have checked so many boxes. I mean, think about this. They've trailed for 3 minutes and 50 seconds this season. It was at the end of the first quarter and in the second quarter last week against Oklahoma. And we know obviously how that game turned out. And yet they have allowed in 360 minutes of football, in which, I guess, let me do some quick math. They've been leading or tied for 356 minutes and 10 seconds of that time. Yeah. And they've allowed 1 passing touchdown. That is just a lights out unit that has gone largely overlooked because we've been talking about the offense. We've been talking about Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning and this quarterback situation, but the defense, to me, being number 1 in scoring defense right now, number 1 in yards per play allowed, like they have just been everything that you could have hoped for if you were a Texas fan coming into the SEC, and that'll be on full display on Saturday night against Georgia, who, look, I think Georgia is in this big tier 2 in the SEC. It's a tier 2 that probably includes Tennessee. It probably maybe includes an LSU. Who knows if it includes Alabama or Ole Miss, but it just feels like a lot of those teams, they're really interchangeable, and just wait a week and it'll probably change. I mean, Arkansas and Vandy have already beat top 5 teams this year. That's what we're talking about, the chaos and perhaps the parity in the SEC this season.
With that parity and a lot of transfer portal, NIL, you know, they're like, the biggest thing is you could, if you were in Alabama or a Georgia, you could have guys that were just waiting in the wings that were 5 stars. But if you lose 3 of them to different places, they don't necessarily help somebody else win a national title. They kind of hurt them being as deep, so that when you have 2 guards out like they do at Alabama right now, when you have some of the depth, you know, that you don't have at Georgia, it changes things where you just can't go, oh, well, it's a bummer that this year's first-round draft pick is out, but next year's first-round draft pick is ready to go.
Yeah, and it's a point that college football purists don't really want to bring up when they talk about the good of the sport. There's a more equal distribution of talent that's being spread across. I know that Group of 5 would definitely disagree with that, and Group of 5 programs would be going, wait a minute, what are you talking about? If we have a guy that does anything of relevance, he's going to get tampered with in 2 seconds. And the Ashton Genties of the world are considered the minority now, who are willing to stay with a Group of 5 program when they obviously have opportunities to go elsewhere. So you could look at it from a variety of standpoints, but the way that I think this season has played out, maybe this is a bit too generalized, but I think we're at least trending in that direction, is that we're seeing some of these upsets in part because these lesser teams have very obvious weaknesses that they can fill via the portal. And you can plug and play some of these guys. I mean, look at South Carolina. Kyle Kennard's leading the SEC in sacks, and he came over from a Georgia Tech program where obviously, like, he had opportunities there, but South Carolina says, look, we need some guys that can just get after it up front. They have another one in Dylan Stewart, who's a 5-star true freshman, but you can just go out and get a guy like that, or get a guy like Nick Scorton from Purdue, who comes back home to Bryan College Station and does great things there. even after he led the Big Ten in sacks as a 19-year-old. So you can address these areas of weakness in ways that you couldn't before. And I think that's why some of these lesser programs are seeing, hey, they can play with a lot of these different teams that we didn't previously expect them to.
I want to talk about Tennessee for a second, and I saw this on your Twitter feed a couple days ago. Nico Amaliava, since halftime of the OU game, 0-1 TD to interception ratio, 37 for 64 for 393 yards passing. That's 6.1 yards per attempt. 21 rushes for 38 yards, no rushing TDs, 2 completions of 30 yards, and 7 sacks taken. Did Oklahoma and then subsequently Arkansas maybe crack the code on the Tennessee offense?
I don't know that they cracked the code, because I do think they're leaving plays out there. I mean, it's not just as simple as the scheme doesn't work anymore. I still have faith in Josh Heupel as an offensive mind and Joey Halzle as an offensive play caller, although Tennessee fans might push back on the second part of that. I do think that there are probably some issues up front on the offensive line that have plagued Nico, and I think Nico's decision-making has to get better. I think both things can be true at the same time. They've struggled at the tackle spots in ways that you just can't. If you want to operate that offense, and if you're going to operate with those wide splits, you can't be a total liability at left tackle. And Tennessee, for the last 10 quarters, has been, well, I guess 12 quarters really, because it was a lot of that Oklahoma game where they were a liability there. They have struggled to find that protection, and it looks like it has gotten to Nico, and his mental clock is not where it needs to be. I think he could have more than one interception in that stretch. I'm kind of surprised that he only has the one. It was a bad interception against Florida play in which he made a predetermined read and just threw it right into a defender. It's just sitting there in coverage. But yeah, this offense has issues to figure out this weekend. And the question is Alabama's defense the get right for Tennessee's offense? Or alternatively, is Tennessee's offense the get right for Alabama's defense, which also comes in riding a 10-quarter streak that's not particularly impressive. So, yeah, a lot of questions it feels like will be answered in Knoxville on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, that's fascinating. On the other side of that game last week was Florida, who fought valiantly to the end and lost Graham Mertz. I saw that you also said that, yeah, wrong about Graham Mertz. I think a lot of people were. I kind of thought he was a guy who's not going to get you beat. He's not also going to help you win a whole lot. But if you watched him this year, he was far from really their problem, which was really eye-opening to me.
You know, think about this too, and this might sound like a little bit of revisionist history, and I have been one to say, look, there are things that Graham Mertz isn't going to give you that other quarterbacks can, and it limits his upside. I mean, Graham Mertz is not making that throw on 3rd and 18 to be able to force a tie like DJ Lagway did. That throw was next level stuff. You can't teach that. You either have that or you don't, and DJ Lagway has that. But think about this. Graham Mertz gets hurt late in that game against Mizzou last year, a game in which it was back and forth in the fourth quarter, and Florida all of a sudden has to turn to a guy and that didn't necessarily run the offense the same way that Graham Mertz did. They end up losing that down to the wire game, and then they lose the following week to a backup quarterback with Florida State. And I have a point I'm going to make here. I promise I'll get there. They win that game against Tennessee if Graham Mertz stays healthy. If he doesn't tear his ACL, I think they win. I mean, look at they had 5 drives before that Lagway touchdown pass where they did absolutely nothing against the Tennessee defense. And it looked like Mertz was starting to figure some things out, fitting that, the play that he ends up leaving on is a touchdown pass, a really nice throw, and a play in which, he wasn't necessarily hit. He was hit on the play before. But my point is, I think the Florida Billy Napier chapter could have looked a little bit different if Mertz had been able to stay healthy. And he was incredibly durable, I thought, with some of the hits that he's taken over the course of the last year and a half. But I just think we can tell probably a different story with Florida if Mertz is on the field for some of those key moments. And those are 3 games that they don't end up winning that obviously would have changed the entire conversation about the Billy Napier era.
Yeah, he would at least be in this year of like, okay, well, we see where it's going. Lagway's here. You got Lagway. We'll give you some time to let it marinate. But now that's over for him. I mean, Yeah, they're 3-3, and he can say, look, we're 3-3. A lot of teams are 3-3, that aren't going to fire their coach. But yeah, the 3 losses were getting drilled by Miami and A&M, and then losing to Tennessee, which Florida fans hate losing to Tennessee.
I don't blame him for hating losing to Tennessee. Yeah. I would hate if I lost to a rival for just the 3rd time in the last 20 years, which that's the case. But yeah, I mean, and the problem with being 3-3 at this point of the season is this dreaded stretch to end the season. And I'll even do the thing where instead of including Florida State as part of this daunting 5-game stretch to finish the season, let's just slide it up and go to Kentucky, because they've lost 3 in a row against Kentucky. Billy Napier has yet to win that football game. And the last time that Florida won that game, it was in front of a reduced crowd in 2020. So they're just trying to overcome that. That's why I think if Billy Napier loses this weekend at 3-4, I think he's fired on Sunday. I don't think you could be the coach that is sitting there having lost 3 consecutive years to Kentucky, the program that you had their number for 3 decades. And while that is really impressive on the part of Kentucky, and they've changed the trajectory of their program during this stretch under Mark Stoops, it's still such a bad look because of the way that Billy Napier has tried to establish this program and trying to do it with a very blue-collar identity like the one that Kentucky has. So if you go into this game and you can't win that game at home against Kentucky, I just think the optics are going to be so bad, and people are going to be looking at the rest of the schedule going, yeah, they've improved, but this isn't going to be anything better than like a 6-6 or a 5-17.
What are your thoughts on the Alabama fan base now learning week by week and having to slowly accept, or maybe rapidly accept, that Nick Saban really is gone?
Man, don't you know, we knew that there were going to be some moments this year in which that reality sank in, and it sank in a couple of weeks ago in Nashville. I think we can all agree on that. And I do think that there could be some better days ahead for this Alabama defense, but Kane Womack came into this job knowing that he was going to be scrutinized in a very unique way, because when you replace the greatest coach in college football history on that side of the ball, we're always going to wonder about the adjustments. Are you making the right adjustments? Well, so far, I would argue that he hasn't been able to do that. And Nick Saban was a master at those in-game adjustments. That's not what Kalen DeBoer is going to bring you as the Alabama head coach. He's not going to bring you those defensive adjustments because of his offensive acumen and his background and where we think his skills lie best. But with Womack, this is now a situation where you got to find answers quick. You can't just say, well, we're starting true freshmen in the corner and we're doing this on defense and it's taking a little bit to implement our system. No. You're sitting there with a group that is unraveling over the course of the last 10 quarters. Bama's been in the midst of a really, really bad stretch where they can't seem to stop the bleeding. I mean, 11 pass plays of 30+ yards that they've allowed in that stretch. That's not going to cut it. And if you're that defense that just can't find answers, like the other day against South Carolina when they nearly had the answers to be able to win that game in Tuscaloosa, you're going to be one and done at a place like that. That's what is staring Kane Womack in the face right now. Yeah,
it's it's very, very daunting to be an Alabama fan for the first time in 17 years. I'm here for the humor of it all. Like, I think it's funny. I have a good friend who's an Alabama fan, and I sent him a text a couple days later. I'm like, hey, well, how we doing? And he's like, well, it just hit me that Nick Saban's really gone. Like, yeah. It's really gone. And I was like, I mean, why didn't it hit you, the day he said I'm retiring? Like, I guess maybe they think, well, his office is now on the other side of the building. He's still there. Like, no, he works for ESPN now. Like, that's what he does. He doesn't work for you anymore. He's there, but he's not there. Do you think nationally, playoff-wise, have you changed your idea about what the playoff will be after this last week that was so tumultuous, especially with Ole Miss right now skating on the edge of the outside looking in?
I don't think Ole Miss is a playoff team anymore. Yeah. That's my biggest change week to week is I picked them to win at LSU, and I thought this was a really nice opportunity for what they have built on that defensive line to be able to go in there, and with a veteran offense, they should be able to respond. And Death Valley at night, I realize it's a place where dreams go to die, but I thought that was where LSU was going to kind of struggle and in that spot against an Ole Miss offense that looked like it had bounced back against South Carolina. But They just turtled down the stretch. They just absolutely turtled. That's a game that LSU fans know they probably shouldn't have won, and Ole Miss fans are like, how in the world did we just get our second loss?
Jackson Dart felt that way too.
Oh my gosh, his reaction afterwards, that kind of told the story, in my opinion. Like, seeing how stunned he was that they came off the field without a win, a game in which they never trailed until that final play, that walk-off winner to Kyron Lacey. Yeah, and you can't just blame it on the Trey Harris injury. As fantastic as that guy has been, Ole Miss just couldn't find those answers. And that's a problem, I think, for this team. And they're staring, I think, more at like a 9-3, 8-4 type season. Think about this. Their penalty yards are wildly overlooked. They're going to have perhaps the most penalty yards of all but one or two SEC teams in the 21st century. And those are like early 21st century Mississippi State teams. They're averaging, I think, 85 penalty yards per game. With a veteran group like that, how is that happening? That's an indictment of Lane Kiffin. It really is. And you know what? You just can't make those mistakes and shoot yourself in the foot in the way that they have. And so, yeah, that was my biggest playoff takeaway from that crazy week 7 was take Ole Miss out of that conversation. I'm not picking them to run the table. I'm not even picking them to beat Georgia. I realize they still have a path if they go 10-2, but I can't sit here and say that I have a lot of confidence in that team with what we've seen from them in SEC play.
How legitimate do you think A&M is?
I think A&M is turning into a really scary team with Mike Elko. I really do. And I love Connor Wigman, and I banged the drum for him for a long time. That season opener was tough. It was really tough. Now, to be fair, Marcus Freeman and Al Golden got 8 months to dial up pressures against that guy. Yeah. And dare I say, it was a little bit more difficult of a task for him than it was for Marcel Reed going into the swamp against the Florida defense that didn't look like it want to get off a single block. And not to take away from what Marcel Reed did as a 3-0 starter. I mean, that kid deserves immense credit. He's got a really nice future ahead. But I give Mike Elko so much credit for being willing to turn to Connor Wigman and say, if we're going to reach the peak of what we have this year, we need to be able to be better passing the football, and we are going to turn to our guy. There's a reason they didn't go in the transfer portal. I think when you see Colin Klein come over from Kansas State, you're like, all right, what are they going to do? They're going to bring Will Howard over here? They're going to do something like that? Are they going to go in the portal and get somebody? No, they like Connor Wigman. They like him a lot, and they should, because you saw in that Mizzou game, that guy is so good when healthy. And if he gets some of these receivers, the Noah Thomases of the world to continue to step up, that's a scary team, especially with what they're figuring out on the defensive side of the ball, with Nick Scorton emerging as one of the best players, not just in the SEC, but really in all of college football. I just think that A&M, you look at them and you realize, wow, they have all of their toughest games are coming up at home. And if they can all of a sudden get into late November with playoff relevance, that's going to be a really scary team to play down the stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Do you was their problem was Jimbo was not changing, scheme, like they were clearly figured out. They had a culture problem because of that. Like when a coach is stubborn and kind of blaming the players, even though they say, man, I love Coach Fisher, like given the opportunity, they all left for a fresh start. And they had those recruiting classes that didn't pan out. But he did bring in a ton of talent. Like that was never a question for whoever was going to get this job. That's why, to me, it was really attractive, is that you can come in and maybe bring in some transfers and your guys, make it more of a worker bee attitude. And I think A&M's kind of back to who they were. They're as close to R.C. Slocum as I think they've been since the day he left.
Yeah, which is not something I expected to say after what we saw in the season opener. It's really not. And I've been a Mike Elko advocate since 2017. I think that's when I have to go back. I mean, even his days at Notre Dame, I was a really big fan of what he was doing. And then when he came over to A&M, I thought that was a guy that just didn't get the credit that he deserved. That 2021 A&M defense was so lights out. But they have really done things under Elko in year one that make you think, well, this is sustainable. They're going to be able to recruit both at the high school level and in the portal. And if you have someone that stands by his guys like Elko does, I mean, people love that dude. You see the way that he stands up for Connor Wigman after that Mizzou game, and you're just going, this guy, people are going to play for him. They absolutely will. People are willing to play for Jimbo, but if Jimbo's not going to make those right decisions and he needs to run the offense and do things his way, and we're only going to save the good plays and the pre-snap motion for Alabama, you're only going to go so far. But yeah, their upside, despite what people said after Mike Elko was hired about that's kind of a cop-out move to hire a former Jimbo Fisher assistant to pay all that money to buy him out. I just think it was a great underrated move, and Mike Elko has proven a lot of people wrong so far.
Last thing, going back to Florida, Billy Napier is fired this week, next week, whenever it is. Do you have an idea? Like, are they still in the Lane Kiffin pipe dream, or is that a pipe dream still?
I still think it's a possibility, and I wouldn't bet on it happening, but they're going to pursue him. They absolutely are. Every indication I've gotten so far is that they are going to swing for the fences, and they're going to get an established power conference coach. Now, does that mean they end up with Eli Drinkowitz? Does it mean that they end up with Jed Fish? Does it mean they end up with someone like Chris Kleiman, Lance Leipold? It's certainly possible. It definitely could be one of those guys, but I do think that Florida is going to be willing to spend and go above and beyond. This is not going to be a budget hire. It's just not. I mean, and they sank, what, $60 million into the Billy Napier regime, and to see it play out this way, they're still going to be willing to cut those checks. And so if you're thinking, well, you know, they're just going to take kind of the cheaper way out, they're going to pay a coach like $6 million a year, which in this day and age is considered actually cheap, as stunning of a sentence as that is. I do not think that'll be the case. I think they will swing for the fences. I do think that Lane Kiffin will be their top target. Whether or not they get him, that might be a different story. The timing of this move and what Lane Kiffin thinks he has at Ole Miss could determine that. But I do think that he's very much going to be in play.
I want to throw one NFL name out for you. Brian Daboll.
Wouldn't rule it out. I don't know that he's a college coach.
Yeah.
I think he's more of an NFL type guy. And I watched him closely with the Alabama offense that he ran in 2017, which did not gel in the way that many hoped it would with Jalen Hurts. And obviously Tua comes in halftime of the national championship, 2nd and 26. You know what happens there. But I watched him on the offseason Hard Knocks with the New York Giants. If you haven't seen that, like anybody listening to this, you should. It's an awesome watch. It's a really interesting look into a front office and how they operate. And I just kind of think he's a little bit more NFL wired, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I just think the response that he has among NFL players is a little bit different than what it would be at the college level. It's a good name and a really good candidate, but I don't know that unless their season kind of implodes and it goes south in a hurry, I don't know that that's going to be something he would look at. I think he's a little bit more wired to be an NFL coordinator if he's not going to be able to keep his job as an NFL head coach.
Absolutely. Thank you, Connor. Connor O'Gara, Saturday Down South, one of the best college football websites out there. Love it. Follow him on Twitter. Read the stuff on the website. Connor, thank you so much. I'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, man.
Connor O'Gara, Saturday Down South. This is 365 Sports.